There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of people pushing fear. There's a lot of people using fear to motivate you to make certain decisions. But we don't make good decisions when we're afraid. We make good decisions when our head is clear and we have a good plan. So that is the path I want to keep you on. To give you a little bit of background here, I'm going to run for you a video about where we are today for the Federal Reserve. And in fact, Jerome Powell just reduced interest rates again because inflation is now in the 2% range. This is their target inflation rate. In record time, with a soft landing, no recession afterward, we got to 2% interest. And we have no recession. To my knowledge, and you can Google this, this is the only time in US history we've had a soft landing. I don't want to toot my own horn too much, but since inflation's been on the rise and they started increasing interest rates, I've been saying I think we're going to have a soft landing. And we did. And this is why the Federal Reserve has learned a lot through other economic eras that did not go so well. And this is why I believe we need to leave the people in power controlling these levers to our economy who know what they're doing and do not have campaigns and political motivations in mind. But before we get to any of that, I want to share with you where we are today. And today happens to be November 9th, 2024. This is going to be a short view of a CBS news piece about the current interest rate reduction and where inflation is at in the economy right now.
The Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell says he will not resign if President-elect Trump tries to force him out. He spoke after the Fed's latest policy announcement, which is the focus of today's Money Watch. The Fed cut interest rates again by 1/4 of a percentage point. Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady has more from the Fed chairman.
The labor market has cooled from its formerly overheated state and remains solid. Inflation has eased substantially from
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is seeing the signs of a strong economy, but there's a disconnect for consumers.
Many average Americans are still not feeling the strength of the economy in their wallets. So what's your message to them on when they might expect relief?
You're right that we say the economy is performing well, and it is, but we also know that people are still feeling the effects of high prices. It takes some years of real wage gains for people to feel better. That's what we're trying to create, and I think we're well on the road to creating that. We completely respect what they're feeling. Those feelings are true.
I'm not sure about you, but that man seems pretty competent. And on top of that, pretty in touch with the American people and what they're going through right now. I think it's also important to take note of what he actually shared at that press conference. Here comes another video for you.
Hi, Victoria Guido with Politico. Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
Well, that's pretty clear. Doesn't sound like he's going anywhere, at least for the next year. There was a follow-up question later on, and they basically asked if he could be fired or any of the other board chairs could be fired. And his response was not permitted under the law. So let's talk about why Donald Trump is trying to do this. They want to drop interest rates faster, but this can have serious consequences and ramifications to our economy. I want to talk to you about two pivotal historical, economic, periods of time that relate to this issue and the development of the Fed. You see, the Fed has been around now for just a little over 100 years, about 110 years is all. But there's been economic eras that haven't worked so well that they've learned from and that we can see operating in our current economy today that are helping to keep things more stable. And this personally is why I'd like to leave the people who know what they're doing what they're doing, and not have the Fed subject to political influence. In fact, let me give you a little bit more information about that. In the description below, you're going to find a link to the history of the Federal Reserve. You can see it on the screen in front of you. Here it is going to offer you a lot of historical information about the development of the Federal Reserve and various economic eras and the Federal Reserve's involvement in that. But the era I want to go to for the beginning discussion is the Great Depression. This one right here. But what I'd like to do is roll this back before the Great Depression. I don't know if you've ever heard it before, but sometimes it's referred to as the Roaring '20s. It was a prosperous economic era. And at that time, the Fed dropped the interest rates really low and pumped a ton of money into the economy. And this, of course, is what Donald Trump would like to do. It makes a wonderful, glorious explosion in the economy. But I'd like you to think for just a moment. If the Fed drops interest rates and there's lots of money in the money supply, you've got lots of money chasing few products because the number of products isn't going to change at first. Like they're just the same amount of products. So lots of money chasing the same number of products, an increase in demand with a limited supply means we get inflation. Everybody with me? So the Fed let this go on and on and on through the entire 1920s, and everybody's having a blast. And then all of a sudden the Fed goes, this is too much. There's too much money out there. We got to do something. And they do. They roll it all back in. Now, a lot of people go to the 1929 crash in the stock market, and they pinpoint that as the start of the Great Depression, and technically it was, but let me tell you why it was. At that stage of the game, because there's so much free money out there, roaring '20s, people were margining their stock accounts. A margin stock account means maybe I put up $1,000 to invest, and then I can borrow the other $9,000, and now I buy $10,000 worth of stock. This works phenomenal if the stock market goes up. But if it goes down, I still owe that other $9,000, even though my stock value might not be at that amount. So when the Fed started to roll back all the money, oh yeah, people started selling their stocks, and that's why it crashed. And I'll also tell you this, because the Fed was relatively new, they were a little like, we aren't sure what to do. Should we increase interest rates? Should we put money back in to stop the crash? So the brand new Federal Reserve wasn't sure what to do during the Great Depression, and they did not act fast. They did not act swiftly, and people suffered for more than a decade. Well, pretty close to the whole decade of the 1930s. It's not good to drop interest rates super low if the economy doesn't need it. Which brings me to another economic era that's very important here to discuss. We're back to that history of the Federal Reserve page, but this time I don't want to take you to the Great Depression or the Great Recession. I want to bring you to the Great Inflation. You see, when the Federal Reserve doesn't act swiftly when there is inflation, it will usually continue to grow. It doesn't normally self-correct. And that's what happened through the 1970s. And that's this page here. I want to talk to you a little bit about this great inflation. There's lots of people like me who are a little bit older who lived through the 70s and 80s. Now, granted, during the 1970s, I was pretty young. Yeah. My biggest concern is how I could get my allowance early so I could get some more candy. And my first experience with inflation was the fact that the dollar I would get for my allowance, yes, a dollar, could no longer buy the same amount of candy. Candy bars that used to be 15 cents each were now 25. And I told my parents I need a raise. I cannot afford the same amount of candy with this little allowance. So I understand the impact of inflation. But for those of us who lived through the 1970s and the high interest rates that followed, have a very different perspective on all of this. What's gone on recently. You see, inflation got so high during the 1970s, it was double digits. This is customarily called hyperinflation. And if the Fed doesn't act quickly, it takes longer to overcome it. Now, no one wants to be increasing the interest rates. It's not popular. So we have a situation that if we have somebody who is politically active, wanting to reduce interest rates to get the economy humming, when inflation comes along, the natural reaction is don't increase the interest rates because people don't like that. But that slow reaction isn't good. It wasn't until 1979 when Paul Volcker came into the Federal Reserve that he took the courageous measures to increase interest rates. By 1980, they were 20%. You heard me right. 20%. And it quite literally took a decade to get them below double digits. His term expired in 1987, and as you would imagine, Ronald Reagan did not renew his position. He nominated somebody else. It's not popular to increase interest rates like this. It takes a courageous person who is doing it for just all the right reasons instead of being at risk to not be looked at favorably. This is why the Federal Reserve is kept autonomous, separate from the political realm. Now, I've got another video all about inflation, and it actually goes through a lot of the numbers through these different eras, looking at different presidents, as well as a better explanation of the causes of inflation and what they've really looked like historically. I encourage you to take a peek at that video. It's in the description. I bet right now you're wondering, well, Renee, how was this supposed to remove the fear about my finances? If Donald J. Trump actually gets control of the Fed and does some of these maneuvers, will he act as he should to control the economy? And that thought, if he does not, can be kind of scary. But here's the thing. There are lots of people just like Jerome Powell who know their job and they know it well. And they're there too. I just want you to know what is going on so that you can make wise choices. So make sure you subscribe and you like this video. Please also comment if you have some questions about this or there's other content that you would like to have. And also check out some of the videos about your personal finances. Most of them focus in on how to manage your debt so that you can save more, because the more money you have saved and tucked away, the less fearful we are about our financial future. So check those out too. And in the meantime, be fearless, and have fun. I'll see you next time.